Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be working on a black cat that I think I asked you about over on the Discord channel a little while back, and by a little while back I mean several months ago. I am behind on this commission. Luckily my grandfather has been very forgiving about our deadline, or it's my self-imposed deadline perhaps. But I'm going to be working on his cat Sasha today for him, and I asked you if you would be interested in seeing the process of a black cat. Now I do already have a tutorial of a black horse, and I'll try and remember to link it up here for you. If not, you can do a search over on Patreon or just ask me in a comment and I can go ahead and link that for you. So we did talk about that already once in just the generalization of black animals, but it's always good to get practice with other species, and I actually haven't painted a cat for a while, so I think one of the reasons I've been mentally putting off this commission is just like I don't want to mess it up. It's been a while, so I want to make sure that it just looks extra nice for him, especially since I've taken so long to get it to him. I also don't think that I've shown you a commission process on a Patreon tutorial. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but from what I can remember right now, typically I would do a bunch of thumbnail sketches with different color compositions, and that way it's easier for a client to approve a concept that I have. But my grandfather said I could do whatever I wanted for it, and I didn't need to stop and ask him about different approvals. So I thought we'd go ahead and just take some creative liberty here. So I've done some color swatching to kind of decide on some different things that I thought might be good to include, and I'll get to the colors later. But there's one more piece before we get started, and that is that I believe it was Sheila asked in our Patreon wish list as well how to transfer images. Typically when I transfer images I use my Lightbox, but it's really hard to record that on camera because I would have to be dark and then you can't see where my hand is and we're tracing a black animal. So I don't know if this is going to be too much better, but what I've done is I've printed out the image that I want to use on a piece of printer paper, and I've put graphite all over the back. You might remember doing this as a kid. The cheap men's graphite paper. You can buy graphite sheets too that are easier. I just don't have any of those in my possession. And then I'm going to carefully place it where I want to on my watercolor paper. I want to make sure it's mostly centered. And I think Sheila's main question was about, sorry, I'm looking for masking tape, was about how do you know what to trace? Because obviously you're not going to trace every single little detail about a painting or a picture to your painting, because a lot of that's going to be made up for with your painting itself. But we do need enough information to go off of that we can get everything down in the right places, or else there would be no point to tracing in the first place. So this is going to be a little hard to show you because it's a black cat. I only have a black and white printer, even if it wasn't a black animal. But I've got this yellow, sorry, you can't see that. I've got this yellow colored pencil, and it's what shows up best on this black as far as I can tell, but I know it's still not super clear. So I will go ahead and I'll try and go slowly so you can see what specifically I'm tracing. And then at the end, I'll kind of hold up the image and I can let you know, like I can show you the glare or like the sheen. Maybe that's not as dark as I imagined it after all, or bright rather. What else can we do? I guess we could do a graphite pencil. It's all gonna be hard to see, guys. I'm sorry. I guess I could use a pen. Oh, goodness, sorry. Hold on. Let's see, where do I have pen? They're in the other room. Nothing is working as planned. One last thought. Here we go. I have a magenta pen here. Will this show up? It will. Okay, I guess it's purple. So basically we need to apply enough pressure to the paper to transfer our graphite, but not press so hard that we score the paper, because as you know, watercolor paper is very delicate. And so we don't want there to be hard lines in any of those places. So I'm just gonna go ahead and trace this first ear. And then I'm gonna stop and check and make sure that there's enough graphite on the paper that is transferring over. And I don't know if you can see that, but I definitely can tell that we've got enough going down. This area here is extra dark because I went over it several times between the mechanical pencil and the pen. But we should be good to go. So Sheila was asking specifically because she knows that we're not going to trace every little thing, but a simple outline probably isn't enough to go off of. So I'm just going to show you what I would do. We're going to gently trace around the major outline, and then we're going to trace around the major features of the face as well. Just enough that I can take over after we remove this printer paper to fill in the rest of the details on my own. So it's very rare that I just trace an image as is. What I'll do is I'll trace kind of the major features, but then you're still going to be left with an image that looks pretty rigid and not quite as detailed as you'd like it to be. So I do it kind of in 2 stages. I blocked in 2 areas on either side of the nose that are really, really dark. I don't always do that, but in this case, I want to make sure that those particular landmarks are noted. Then we're going to come up this side of the face. And one thing that I try to be really careful of is that this is a furry animal and he's got fur that kind of goes back and forth. But the thing is, he's backlit. So this line here where the black fur is not the edge of his head, it's up here. So we're gonna have to keep that in mind, and that can be really difficult because when you're tracing with graphite, it's gonna leave that dark graphite line. But in those lighter areas, we don't wanna be able to see that. I'm mapping out a couple other dark spaces, and this printout is not the best quality, so I'm going to check my original reference photo to see if I can tell. I know it's really hard to see here, but if I can tell more detail in this region here. The picture isn't great either. I took it on a camera phone when we were visiting for Christmas, and it was kind of just quickly in passing while the cat was available. So typically you might want to work with a higher quality image, but I will include this one in the description below this video, or you can just find another black cat image from Pixabay if you would like to do a different one. I traced in the wrong spot here, so we'll go back and fix that once we remove the paper. And the other thing about working on a dark animal is that we're going to lose a lot of this detail pretty quickly in the painting process because of the fact that we're going to be using dark colors as the majority of the painting. We basically just need to get down the major features so we can map those out and tell where we're going, and the rest is going to be up to us when we're painting the image itself. Tracing the main shape of the eyes. The eyes you want to be really careful with. It really matters where your lines go down. Even really, really tiny changes, whether you're on like this side of the line or that side of the line of the actual reference photo, can make a really big difference in terms of symmetry and making sure things are the same size. All right, so there's a lighter area here, and then it gets darker again in front of it, but I don't think we need to put down that information. I think that's something we can gather as we are painting. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully check the whole image underneath. I taped it in opposite corners when we started, so I'm going to leave one corner taped down. It's really important that we have that not go anywhere, and make sure that I can see enough of that sketch to go off and, sorry, I hiccuped, and go off and do the rest of the sketch on our own. It looks like the top of the head is a little light, as are the areas going out from the face. So I'm just gonna put these in a little bit darker so we can tell where they are. And there we go. I think you can see enough of that. It's very light, but that is a good thing if you're working on a lighter subject. What we can do for our darker subject is I can peel off this whole drawing and set it aside, and then get back out my standard pencil that just slipped under my palette holder, and we can go over these lines and put in an actual sketch of where we want to be working on. So I'm just gonna finish that up here. And because this is such a dark subject, you really don't need to worry about going too dark with your lines. I mean, within reason. But I'm actually going to switch over to a darker lead because I'm having a really hard time seeing my 2H pencil. I'll just go over the lines we've already gone over, since this B pencil is just innately dark, or darker than our 2H. I would also make sure that when you're tracing, you use a thin object. You don't even have to use a pen or something that makes a mark, right? Because we don't care about what ends up on this sheet here. We only care about what ends up over here. So you can even use like a toothpick if you had it and you're gentle enough with it. This really helps for proportions of things like ears and noses that might be difficult to judge if you're just starting off with drawing. It'll help you really quickly get in just the location of where those things should be so that you can focus on color and contrast and form. Around the eyes is where I do want to be really careful because those are going to be much lighter than everything else. The shape is fine, but the area directly around the pupil was just too dark. And that's going to be problematic when I go to color it, so I'm just going to try and get it in one more time, a little smoother. Or two more times, you know. However long it takes to get the job done. Here's where that darker shape was on this side of the nose. The other side has actually mostly faded. I think I rubbed over it with my hand a little bit, but we know it goes from the corner of the nose to the corner of the eye. Putting that top line really lightly, and then we'll know that we'll come down here with some more stronger color. So I think that is about it for our under drawing. At this point, if you are worried about anything being too dark, if you have a gummed eraser, you can just kind of go over areas that are a little concerning, that you want to be a little bit lighter. But I think we're okay on the rest of this. If you wanted to go ahead and put in a shape here, that would be reasonable. This area here that I said was darker actually kind of flows into the shape of the ear, so we can keep that in mind. There's going to be a lighter patch right here over the eye and darker again in this region. So basically, to answer Sheila's question, it's really up to you on how much information you feel like you need before you get started. If you're someone who can continually check back and make sure that you're, you know, in the right place, then you probably don't need as much information. But sometimes, like, I'm really forgetful, and if a line isn't there, I'll paint over it. You've seen me do that in tutorials where you just want to make sure you take a little extra precaution in terms of areas of lightness and darkness. So I know that there's some artists who will be way more detailed about the light and dark areas than I tend to be, but I really just do outlines, major features, and we go from there. So I'm going to set aside all my drawing tools. And we're going to take a look at the color composition that I have for this piece. So I played around with different colors here, and what I thought I was pretty set on actually might have changed. So when I put this down wet, I really liked the way that the Perylene Violet, the neutral tint, and the Sodalite were interacting with each other, but the Sodalite really kind of overpowered everything else. And so I'm not sure if that's something that I want to include, or if I do include, it might want to be on a subsequent layer, a layer that sits on top of everything else. So for our starting layers, we're probably going to start with the Perylene Violet, the neutral tint, and maybe some Anthraquinone blue, which I thought I had ruled out, but apparently not. We're actually going to be doing the eyes first on this piece. I normally don't like to do that because when you put in a dark pupil on an eye, it really locks it in and you can't really touch it with any other colors, but so much of this painting is going to be black or dark shades of black anyway, that we really should lock down those lighter colors first and expand outward from there. So I just have those three swatches over here. We've got the neutral tint, Sodalite, Perylene, Violet, Anthraquinone blue, and then I thought that we might do like a little bit of a splash background on this one since it's a portrait and it's just kind of floating in the page. So I'll pull in some cobalt teal for that, only because, I mean, you could really get pretty much any color in here depending on what you like because we have such a neutral subject, but I know my grandfather has a lot of blue in his house, so I'm going to go ahead and use that color mixed with some of the Anthraquinone blue to create almost a cobalt teal shade, or not cobalt teal, I'm sorry, like a cobalt blue shade, but a little bit closer to the teal. And this was a larger mix that I did with the Anthraquinone blue, the cobalt teal, and a little bit of the Sodalite as well, and it does have some interesting granulation, but we're gonna have to see when we get there, if that's something that we're looking for. For the eyes themselves, we're going to be using yellow ochre, quinacridone gold, and a little bit of sap green. So I know it's going to be really hard for you to see this image here, so I'm going to keep it probably off to the side of the screen. Let's go ahead and bring you in a little closer. So hopefully you can see. I just want to make sure you're in focus. And I'm going to pull out my Silver Black Velvet size 8. Handy dandy. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want from these first. I guess for the eyes, maybe we'll bring in an even smaller brush. I have a little size 4 here as well. I know you can't see my palette for this video. I'm using my big studio palette. I thought about using a different one, but I was like, you know what? I've been working with so many different palettes lately, and I put this palette together for a reason. Do you guys want to peek at it? I don't want to make anyone motion sick, but like, it's over there. Bring you back down. I put this set together for a reason. It has colors that I know and that are reliable, and ultimately I put them together so that I could work on commissions and have all the colors at my fingertips that I would need or could want for a piece that I really needed reliable colors for. So it makes sense to go ahead and do that. Now, the reason you might not have heard me talk about commissions, especially if you are newer to Patreon, is that I don't really do them anymore. I got to the point where they were really stressing me out. I don't know what that was. It was just like a mental block I had with them, where I felt the pressure to make these be like as perfect as they could be for clients, because some clients were really, really particular and really wanted their animal to look identical to the way that they do in real life. Occasionally I would have a really fun client that just wanted me to take my own artistic liberty, but that was less often than the other, you know? So if you're looking to commission someone for an art piece, one of the things I would recommend, you know, as the artist, is make sure that you have an artist that already does something in your style. I'm always very appreciative of people and like my friends who have complimented my work, but I've also had friends request for me to do like children's books that they were working on, and all of the pitches that I've heard for those, like I had 2 different friends ask me, and they weren't at all in my wheelhouse. They had to do with subjects that weren't animals, and they had to have backgrounds, and they were just things that I was not comfortable painting. And I've encountered a little bit of that in commissions as well, where someone will ask me to work on something that I'm just not comfortable working on. So as a client, if you're ever in that position, make sure that when you're looking at different artists, even if you love their art style, if it's not something that you would want to hang in your home, you may consider looking at another artist that has something closer to what you already like to do. And I'm not speaking for all artists, because I'm sure there are artists out there who don't mind doing things outside of their normal wheelhouse. But I've been thinking about it a lot in recent months, because I haven't been pushing commissions. I haven't been advertising that I do them at all. And I think that's just because I have a little bit of an aversion to them, because I feel like I have to strive for perfectionism, and that doesn't help me bring out any of my creativity. So that was probably a conversation you didn't necessarily ask for, or maybe you didn't care to hear, but hopefully that gives you a little insight to my process. Or if you're an artist who is starting to branch out into commissions, just some food for thought. I know that I produce work that looks better when I'm excited about the piece and when I know that I can do a good job on it. So I was really excited when my grandpa told me that he wanted it to be a surprise and I could just work on it and see what I can come up with. And that's honestly one of the reasons that I feel comfortable, relatively speaking, doing this as a tutorial. I'm still nervous, guys. I'm still nervous, but I feel relatively comfortable working on it for you guys, because if I was having to strive for that perfection, if I was working on my grandfather is a paying client, but like if I was working on a client that I didn't know and that was paying a ton of money for like a big painting, I would be much more nervous about it and need all of my concentration to go towards the painting itself. and not talking to you guys as well. And this one is more, I mean, I'm certainly, that sounds bad. That sounds like I'm not putting all my attention into this, and I absolutely am, but it's more in the things that I'm used to talking to you guys about. How's that for confusing? I'm just babbling at this point, aren't I? All right, so I started off by putting down light washes of yellow ochre and quinacridone gold, and then I'm just dropping in a little bit of the sap green right around where the iris meets the pupil, so that we have a gradient between the yellow and the green, and then we'll eventually cover that with the pupil. I want them to somewhat match each other, just so that we can make sure that we are somewhat uniform in the appearance of our eyes. Cats also it's sometimes hard to tell, like in the pictures here, I can't tell if in person they lean closer to yellow ochre or if they lean closer to a green, and I'm not around in that area, unfortunately, enough to know the cat well enough. I get to see them several times a year, which is great, but I'm not up there all the time, and I haven't seen them since Christmas, so I have to guess. And because they're right between those two colors, I feel like that's a nice even balance there. If you're working on a commission for a client, ask them, and I'm sure that would be fine. All right, so now is the nerve-wracking part. We've got our first wash down on the eyes, and we need to put our first washes down elsewhere. And when you're working on black animals, that can be a really scary time because, I mean, it's black. It's really hard to lift. We're going to be using neutral tint today. I got water on my paper already. So it's pretty staining, and our decisions are going to be somewhat final, you know. So we just want to be really careful about the way that we lay down our colors. We're going to start with really light washes and then build up layers of deepened color and bring in some of that Perylene and Anthraquinone separately. I'm sorry if I'm babbling today, guys. I'm not having a very eloquent day. I am mixing up on my palette a nice loose wash of the neutral tint. I know this really sucks when you guys can't see this. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can turn this without making too much noise. You can kind of see in this corner here, nice loose wash. I have to turn it back the other way though, for my shoulder. I should have some paper towel nearby in case I have to lift anything. I'm going to start from the left and work my way right so that we don't have any back runs. I'm going to try and get a nice little value map going. So all of this is going to be lighter than it will eventually be, but within that we are still going to have some variation so we can tell where certain things need to be lightened and where things need to be darkened. Sasha was a rescue kitty, so I believe that the notches on the ears are for the Trap, Neuter, Release program. I don't know if that's a nationwide thing or if it's local to the Bay Area, but here they will trap cats and neuter them or spay them and then put them back out in the feral population. It's not a perfect solution, but it at least stops them from creating more and more pets that don't have homes. I want to make sure that I keep this edge nice and moist. Try and keep a bead of water going on here. Oops, sorry. Let me put my phone on silent. Gosh, the values are so hard to tell on this dark cat. Which I'm sure you all can relate to, the questions that I've gotten about dark-haired animals. It's often just very difficult to tell where to put emphasis. We need to keep this whole edge nice and wet while we're working in other areas so that it doesn't create any unfortunate lines. I'm working on a block of Honolulu Cezanne paper. One nice thing about doing the graphite transfer instead of doing a light board is that I didn't have to detach it from the block. So I can have a nice stretched out paper that isn't taped down and hopefully won't warp as much. I've been asking you guys over on Discord about that new series that I posted about maybe last week on the Patreon feed of new colors. I'm sorry, a new series that focuses on different palette brands, like suggesting certain colors from, I'm not saying this right. Maybe I can't paint and talk at the same time. Jokes. If, for instance, I was working with Daniel Smith and you wanted to know the top colors I recommend for starting a palette like that, that's what the series would be covering. And I've been putting off Daniel Smith because I can't decide. There's too many good ones. So I'm just trying to add that area of darkness there. Keeping this, oh no, I messed it up. I dropped water down it unintentionally. So we'll have to go back and fix that. But this bottom edge here too, I want to make sure that it's kind of taken care of. Make it nice and loose, but intentional, not just messy. And then fix what I just screwed up here. So we had that darker area in this region. I kind of dropped our color into, and then taking a damp brush, just coming up the center of the nose there, kind of carving out the bridge until I'm ready to work on the rest of the area. There is some dark color that comes over. I just wanted to make sure that we are happy with our values in other areas before we come back to it. In fact, we do need there to be more, this might be too dry to work on. We need more color in this region, more value rather, sorry. I have the brightness turned up all the way on my phone and it's still difficult to see. So again, we dropped in that dark color, and then I'm gonna go in with a mostly dry brush and just kind of blend out that color and form it and shape it into the different areas of the face we want. You can see the cheekbone here. It's actually lifting better than I expected it to, so that's something. All right, are we still okay up here? Let me get clean water on my brush. We're gonna come back up here, wet it down again. Just gonna kind of hold my phone in my hand in this bottom corner. helps me to see without a glare, but does take away a hand that I have available to me, so. I've probably worked this area more than I should have if I were a little bit more confident with the values, but it should be okay still. I don't think I'll have any problem adjusting in the following layers. I don't know if this is too dry to put down color on. I do want to put some darkness in this region here. That color likes to flow a little bit more so than most other Daniel Smith colors. So after dropping them in, just gonna go up and really the really almost dry brush, because we don't want to add any water, we don't want to cause any backgrounds. I'm just gonna form where this color is. I do believe it started raining outside. It sounds very wet. I think we're going to end up having a fair amount of drying with the heat tool today. So even though there are areas of lightness on the cat, they're really still gray. They're not white. So in this first wash, we're not adding so much color that won't work. I said that weird again. We're adding color so that there's color on the page and we don't have the white of the paper showing through, but it'll still be light enough to work in those areas. And we can just get darker where we need to. All of this space back here is pretty dark. But if we get too close to the face, it's going to bleed onto the face, so we'll just do this for now. Also, this has started to dry, so we can't go back into that area at the moment. We can coax it into these little splotches we have. So it looks like it naturally comes out to the edges. And you can see up here, probably better than I could since I was focusing in other areas, that we had quite a big back run. I didn't come in here quickly enough with the darker pigment. So that is something we will adjust in our next layer. But for now, I will at least come up in this region. Oh, I did miss in my sketch, I missed the notch in the ear on this side. One color that I missed in my planning stages is that we can actually see a little bit of a pinkish hue inside the ear. Maybe we could do that with our Perylene Violet, actually. There's a ridge on the ear that is much lighter than the back of the ear and then the inside of the ear. So I'm just trying to leave that and soften the edge so that it doesn't look too harsh or strange. If you watched my last tutorial, this is the brush that has the bad tip on it. So I'm having to rotate it in my hand to make sure that it's going in the right direction. I'm just trying to pick up a little bit of the paint here to come further down. And where's my other size 8? Here we go. Here's the one that is in better working order. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't mix my own black for this, personally, and I'm just noticing there's this huge splotch over here. I don't know how that got here. Personally, when I'm working on animals that are entirely black and it's a fairly large painting, I find it really tedious to go back and forth trying to constantly mix up enough color to do my washes. So I do tend to use a pre-made color, but somewhere off black. So a neutral tint usually, sometimes soda light. I have done animals before in burnt sienna and ultramarine, and I think that horse that I did was in that color combination or some other mixture. But I thought it would be nice to show you the other way that I do it too, whereas I put down these washes and the value, and then we can kind of tint it with other colors like the Perylene violet and the Anthraquinone blue, so that we still get color in our painting, we get dimension, we get depth, but we didn't have to be mixing washes the entire time. All right, so at this stage, I'm gonna go in and just soften up some of these hard edges. Do you see how hard this edge is here with the pigment that went out to the sides? I'm just gonna lightly go over them with a stiff brush. Doesn't matter what kind of stiff brush, as long as it's safe for your watercolor paper. I wouldn't recommend a blunt scrubber. I'm trying to do this in as fine of a line as possible. And this might be completely unnecessary if we get dark enough where this would have been covered. That's a likely scenario as well. They just tend to distract me when I'm working, so I'll lift them up here. All right, so now I'm going to hit it with the heat tool so we can go in and do our next layer. All right, while I was doing that, off to the side here on my palette, again, I'll try and show you. Sorry, this is so cumbersome. I've mixed up 2 extra puddles. This is neutral tint with the Perylene violet and the Anthraquinone blue, so that when we're doing this second layer, we can go in with the black if we want to, or we can go in with one of the 2 tinted versions of it. I'm gonna pull back up my picture. The first thing that I'm gonna do is I was gonna say the first thing I'm gonna do is put in that forehead. We can at least lighten this particular edge so it's not as harsh. Yeah, let's go ahead and put in some more color, make it look a little bit more uniform. I love working on things past the first layer. They just feel a lot more rewarding to me. Like you can see change happen a little bit more drastically. Trying to keep this black off the eye. It's being very stubborn. This was supposed to originally be a smaller piece, which it's easier to control the amount of backgrounds, or just like the areas that you're working in are harder to keep congruent because they're so close to each other. But again, because it's a family member and I've made him wait for this for longer than I would have liked to, I decided to upgrade the size. He doesn't know that yet, but hopefully he'll like it. Does make my job a bit harder though. I should add, I don't want to eliminate all backgrounds. I've really come to accept them and their versatility for what they add to the medium, because I feel like some of what is great about watercolors is their ability to have this really fluid, loose nature. But it is always a struggle in my perfectionist brain to try and leave things alone when they look like they're not perfect. But it will make for more interesting painting, so that is a skill I'm working on. Going in with really concentrated paint over here so I can really control where it flows. I'm going to get some of our Perylene Violet and drop that into this ear. It will dry less saturated, but it'll at least give us a bit of color, reminiscent of being able to kind of see the translucency of a cat's eye. I mean, ear. I think in the shadow right next to it, I want to drop in some of the blue mixture, just to start adding some visual interest. It'll become especially apparent when we start to tint out these washes. This cauliflower, this color really loves to cauliflower. It did it again up here. Guess I haven't worked with it on its own for quite some time. So if I was being smart, I would have done the other ear first, something that crossed my mind multiple times while I was over there, but I didn't. So I just need to be really careful about where I put my hand down on the paper as I work on the other side. I'm going back into the flat black mixture, the neutral tint. And I'm going to start at the top here. This ear is turned pretty much all the way forward, so we really can't see much of the back side of the ear. The inside of this ear will also be violet, so that we can match the other side, but it's not quite as prominent. As we come down here, I'm going to start adding in some of that blue. This is the black again. Keep saying black, but neutral tint. Daniel Smith's neutral tint isn't quite as purple leaning as, say, like M. Graham, which I know some of you are familiar with. I got the wrong color on my brush. I meant to go in for the Anthraquinone blue. I grabbed some of the Perylene instead. So we do want to work a little bit harder to make sure we add in some visual interest to these colors. I'm just going to bring this blue wash across. Maybe add a little bit of our Perylene up here. That was more than a little bit, but wipe off my brush so it's nice and damp, not too wet. I can tell some water dropped off my ferrule there and slid down. I think I'm gonna let this whole area dry. There's a lot more work I want to do around the eyes, but I would like to be able to work in a clean layer, I think. Just make sure that doesn't back run too much. I'm gonna skip down to the body behind the chin. I'm mixing up some more of the Anthraquinone blue and the neutral tint together. And then a lot of this area kind of fades into each other. So we don't necessarily need them to be two completely distinct regions, like it would be like in a coloring book or something like that. We're gonna come down here and gently line this area. Then we're gonna go back in with a clean brush and let's feather out. Including this top line. I want the top to be a little bit more controlled, but I don't want it to be a hard line. Just kind of let them flow there. Bring this forward. At this point, I can't tell if it's the paint or the paper that is being incredibly finicky with these backgrounds. I mean, it already started right here, and it's just gonna get substantially worse if I don't come in and fix it very quickly. So how I'm gonna fix that is I'm gonna mix up that same mixture again, and I have to just come back in and lay over it another time and fade it back out. That's the only way to really get rid of a background of that size. So I need to put down the reference photo with my left hand so I can tilt my board up. I'm not going for like a full-on dripping look like my earlier work, but I do want it to have a nice edge on that bottom there. I'm going to put in some of the Perylene on this far edge that would be kind of backlit. I'm going to try and keep that in mind as I work through the painting. It won't be exclusively to these designations, but the lighter areas I'm going to be using the purple. The darker areas I'll be using the blue. See, and it's back running again. We're going to let it go. We're going to try and see what it comes up with, and maybe we'll really like it. But boy, is it being a pain. I'm going to come up here, and in this area we're going to do the same that we did with the blue with the Perylene. Told myself that I should set aside 2 hours for this painting. I think it's going to be longer. Unfortunately, we're halfway through and I don't feel halfway done. Instead of softening off this edge into the face, I'm going to soften it off by backing it away from that line. I'm also going to try and pick up some of this background. I cannot express how frustrating this is. This is ridiculous. I mean, I was working very quickly. That should not have happened. And now I need to know if it's the paint or the paper because, ugh, it's frustrating. All right, well, since we haven't touched anything near the eyes, we can work on that while other things are drying. I always like to work on a couple layers in the eyes, even if it's just building up the same colors to give them a little bit more depth. And I feel like this camera needs to come a little closer towards me. There we go. So I'm going to mix up some more of the yellow ochre and quinacridone gold with a little bit more Quin gold this time. Go for a little bit more of a glow. I'm going to kind of put in this, I don't want to say banding, but kind of striations, very subtle, so that we can see some of the first layer, some of the second layer. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of my sap green and do that again towards the inner area of the eye. And I tend to try and overlap whatever color is in the iris with where the pupil is going to go, just so that I don't risk having a gap between the two. Because that won't look good. There's a couple little flecks. Just tapping those in really gently. And there's even one darker line of like a tan color here. Okay. Just gonna put in a really light glaze of the Perylene Violet on the side of the nose that is highlighted. And same thing with the areas that are kind of along those planes of light. I have to be really careful with this one because that one's not dry yet. Just try and apply that dry paint first and then gently fan it out with some water. There's some on the bottom lip. Put a little color under the eye here. I'm not breathing. Not breathing properly anyway. Good reminder to make sure you're taking care of yourself while you're painting. It's a reminder of why I paint small these days. I get so stressed out in big spaces. It's like the opposite of whatever painting claustrophobia would be. I like smaller spaces and being able to control the water a little easier. I need to turn this, and there are some little hairs coming up off of this side of the face. It's always tricky to do when you know you're going to be doing a background, because these little lines are going to be really hard to paint around. So maybe it would be smarter to save this for later. But I guess we'll see how it goes. All right, I do believe it is heat tool time, and I'll see you in a few. All right. Just taking it all in, trying to process. I think I like going in with this little small size 4 brush. It's giving me a little bit of control in terms of water. I still like the size of the bigger brush for the textures that it brings, but I think in this particular situation, with how much our paint is backgrounding, it would be smart to size down a little bit. I'm coming in with the blue mixture. Sorry, when I refer to Anthraquinone blue and Perylene violet from now on, it's that color mixed with the neutral tint. But you can definitely tell that it's leaning blue. It's just a little deeper than it would be otherwise. So we're gonna come in here and really start laying down some of our darkest values. I'm gonna start working with 2 brushes, I think. I'm gonna use a damp version of our size 8 just to very gently bring this edge out. And then I'm gonna turn my page again so I can do some little furs coming out on this side of the face. A little bit more neutral tint. And then we're going to bring that inward. Rinse off our brush, same smaller brush. I'm going to bring some of that edge inward. I'm going to kind of go sporadically. I don't want it to be a completely smooth transition. Same thing on this bottom edge. And I'm going to continue this color up towards the cheek, and I want to be really careful about where this color goes. It's right in the kind of dip of the face behind the cheek. I keep calling this cheekbone and this cheek, which is probably confusing. I actually don't know what this area is called on a cat. Should look that up. And I'm just gonna bring that contour around those areas of the face. Too much water, so I'm getting more pigment. I'm just tapping it into the wet areas that are already on the paper. And we're going to bring it back to that little triangle that was here at the very beginning of our sketch. Rinse and dry our brush. Soften off these edges. There isn't a ton of light on this cheek, but I do want to bring in some color. It looks really detached right now. Just drop a little bit of the Perylene in there. Go back to our blue. And we originally had a little area carved out here above the eye. We can't really see it anymore, but that was darker than the surrounding areas. So we'll put that color back in there. Once again, rinse the brush, dry it off. Try and fade out that color to a pleasing gradient. Trying to make sure there isn't a lot of extra liquid on my brush. And I'm going to come in over the top of the eye and put in a few little furry strokes. Just clean water right now. Soften up this area. We're going to come kind of across the nose and back down on the other side. Drying off my brush as much as I can. I'm gonna soften off this background just a little bit. I don't think there's anything I can do here without messing it up too much, so. We're gonna try. Just a little bit. Get some more of the Perylene violet mixed with the neutral tint. Back to the Anthraquinone blue. It's a very thick mixture. There's not very much water in it. Just trying to bring it back over the areas and unify them together a bit more. This whole area needs to be darker on this side of the nose, but I can't do that right now. So we'll have to come back to it. Trying to coax this out with as little water as possible. You know, I haven't done much talking, but it's really the same technique over and over. Same, putting the dry pigment down and softening off. Got some Black Panther vibe going on here. Okay, lost a little bit too much highlight here. Try to pick that back up, smooth out the rest. Make sure we get a little bit of that Perylene on the edge again. And then also in this area. Got more of the blue. I'm laying in the paint in the direction of the fur, even though I do plan on softening this all off. flip this again. We need to do more of these little guys. I need a lot of pigment now for the body. So mixed up some of the Anthraquinone and then the Perylene. I'm going to start with the Perylene. We're going to have to do a little bit of negative painting here. Going to kind of carve in those lighter fur pieces that are sticking off the side of the face. Kind of bled together here, unfortunately. I think we need to come in a little bit further below here. Hold on one sec, guys. Oh no, I got paint all over the bottom of the paper. Okay, that's not going anywhere. Great. Sorry, I need to tilt this up so I can get a look at it. Trying to transition to the cooler color. Maybe mix some of that up here just to add some variety, some interest. I don't love what happened to the bottom line here. I really preferred it on my first wash, but I don't want to keep creating new ones, so I'm going to try and get this bleed out to the same line. Look at my reference. It's all really dark under here. Board is tilted. Just gonna try and add some value. I don't want it to be too dark. Watercolor tends to get glossy if you put it on too thickly. And we've got Perylene back on this other side. Put in some more of these little burr marks. kind of neglected the whole muzzle area here. I'm going to go back to the neutral tint on its own and just add the inner corner of the mouth. And then I'm also going to add the nose. Completely lost my sketch of this area. I'll make sure that I can see it appropriately. Looks like I'm too far over. My clean rinse water in the two different buckets is almost as dark as the other container. It's a lot of pigment we're using in this one, a lot of dark staining pigments. I'm adding some neutral tint to the darkest areas of the painting. This section here wasn't quite dry though, and I didn't realize that. While this is still drying, I'm going in and deepening some of the darkest areas. Going in with a clean brush just to soften off the top of the nose there. Put a couple little fur marks right above it. All of this has been neutral tint, just trying to add in some nice contrast, some really stark contrast in a couple areas of the painting. We're going to gently tap the top edge of this and bring it kind of up word a bit. I'm still going in with that size 4 so that my water doesn't go out of control. This inner corner gets a bit of that neutral tint treatment. The inside of this ear gets it. I'm using this side of my brush quite a lot. Did we finally turn it around? I'm not gonna lie, didn't have a lot of hope in the middle there. I was not convinced I could pull this off. I think it was really just lacking in those really dark tones, which is a wonderful lesson in making sure that you're not afraid to go too dark. Kind of my unspoken mindset in the middle here was a bit of panic and anxiety regarding, oh my gosh, am I gonna have to start this over, like off stream, and just make sure I have something to give to my grandpa, but not really be proud of this particular piece. And I was kind of like, well, if that's my mindset, I don't have much to lose. Let's at least try and see if adding some really dark color will help turn things around. And it did. So a lot of times when we're looking at paintings, looking at our own paintings and wondering why they look off or wrong, a lot of times it's just that we don't have enough contrast in the piece. We don't have enough value to kind of tell us exactly where we want things to be. So I think this last little pass of dark tones has really helped in that regard. Don't love this edge down here, so let's soften that off somehow. A little more of the Perylene in this cheek area. Whatever we decided we're calling that. There's too much water on my brush. Still too much water. Let me soak some of this up. adding some actually pretty close to straight Perylene violet on the ears right now. We're going to do this center area in the neutral tint. Gonna pull some of our Anthraquinone blue to the back of the ear again. This is the Anthraquinone blue mixed with the neutral tint. Back to the Perylene. I feel like this area is going to get really washed out if we leave it as is. So instead of leaving it a very light highlight, we're going to go ahead and just put that violet in and let that be kind of our highlight color substitute. We'll mix that color underneath. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. We're going to do the same thing over here. Adding just a little bit of neutral tint into this mixture to deepen it up a little bit. Do the same across the crown here. Just a little bit of that neutral tint. All right, so our lessons learned today, not to be afraid of our darks. Two hours is not long enough for an 8 by 10 animal portrait. And that to build up a lot of depth and color, you're gonna need a lot of layers, a lot of patience. And when you're working on black animals, it's important to add in some other colors so that it doesn't just look completely flat. I don't know if I ever finished my thought on, I was explaining why I wasn't using burnt sienna and ultramarine. I don't remember hearing the words come out of my mouth, but I wanted this to have like a richer color to it rather than a light earthy color. I would probably use a light earthy color for something like a black horse or a tapir or something that has an inkling to, like, you know, roll around in the dirt outside or something like that, which I know cats can do, but I just think of cats as being kind of like a cooler, moodier type of black. So we went with that today. Just because of the time constraints, I need a break and I want to make sure that I'm coming at this with fresh eyes and that I don't ruin everything in the last couple steps. I'm going to finish up the pupils on the eyes for you, but I'll probably do the highlights off stream. It's going to be the same as I always do highlights. I'll use my Bleedproof white ink, a very small brush, either a 1 or a 2, to do highlights around the eyes, the whiskers, the ears. I'll probably tint the whiskers to be kind of like a cool grayish blue color so they're not too stark against the rest of the painting. I don't want to go in adding pure white on top of these really dark colors. It'll look really out of place. As usual for my eyes, even though I have them drawn in, I'm going to outline them with the black first. Make sure that they're in the right place before I commit to shading them entirely. Tilt it up towards myself so I can see everything. Perpendicular to my eyes. And then we can go ahead and shade. I had originally drawn in the highlights, but I never end up avoiding them. I just fix them later. I enjoy the process more that way. Usually I'll end up doing 2 layers of black for the irises, just to make sure that they're nice and deep. Really the centerpiece of the artwork. One more thing I want to do with you guys. Let me dry this and then we'll be right back. I do want to carve out a little bit of this shape here. It's not quite what I want it to be, but this can also double as what I wanted to show you. We are going to bring in a little bit of a shadow on the underneath the upper eyelid. So I'm using a light wash of that neutral tint to shade that area, so we can get a little bit of roundness to it. There's also a little bit of that shading on the outer corner of this eye. I'm getting another thick mixture on my size 4 with a nice point. We're going to bring one more solid line where the bottom eyelid is. The other side was fine, but this side wasn't dark enough. And then as for that splash background, I actually am not sure at this point because we have such nice edges with our fur. I might just leave it the way it is. I might also ask my mom what she thinks he would like. I'm trying to make this a surprise since he said for me to pick out, you know, the big decisions and everything. So I might send a picture to her, ask her what she thinks, if I should add a background or not. And then whatever I decide, I will go ahead and put that final picture up either on Discord or on the main stream. You guys can let me know if you want to see it on the main stream. I will probably post this. I mean, if you're got to the end, it's probably too late for this information, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the Discord server today once it's done processing. But I'm not gonna post it on Patreon in the feed until tomorrow. I'm gonna get to see my grandpa tomorrow and give it to him, so I want it to be a surprise, and since he's a patron, I don't want him to see it before that happens. So I know he's not on the Discord. We'll share it off over there. Maybe you can get a head start on it if you're on the Discord, and otherwise it will be on the Patreon feed shortly. Just putting in a couple little more marks here, little fur textures. I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Sorry it's not 100% done, but again, those other two techniques that I'm going to be finished, well, one for sure with the highlights and two possibly with the background, I've done in other tutorials, so you can go ahead and take a look at the tutorial list and find them pretty much anywhere throughout the history of videos. I could be here fine-tuning stuff all day, but I do really think I need a break so I can come back with fresh eyes and make sure that all my values are in place. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you. This officially wraps up the February videos. I'm back on track, so we'll get started and do 3 more for March. So it'll be busy, but I'll see you around, and I hope you have a good evening until then.